of grief and despair, then they can help us develop and recover in our loss. So I think memories are very important. And then going along with this, and what Linda said, I think another big factor in recovery is desire. What do I really want? What is the new normal that I really desire? What is it that I need to make me complete again? I think expectations, memories, and desire often work hand in hand, and sometimes we have to ask ourselves, do I really want to heal? You know, I think sometimes that grief just so depresses us, and we turn so deeply inward that we sometimes don't allow memories or desire to come forth, and they can enslave and destroy you. One of the things that, being a history buff and also a sports fan throughout my life, Babe Ruth was the home run king, and always has been, until Hank Aaron broke his record. But more people are still look at Babe Ruth as being the top home run hitter, but a lot of people don't realize that Babe Ruth held the record for the most strikeouts before Hank Aaron also broke that one. Broke his home run record and his most strikeouts. But Babe Ruth tells the story, or someone tells the story, about there was the season came down to the last game of the year. I think it was the Yankees and the Indians, but I don't know. It was back in the 1920s. And Babe Ruth came up to bat 3 times, and he struck out 3 times. And he came up in the 8th inning with a chance to win the game, and guess what he did? He struck out again. And the game went into extra innings, and it was 0-0. And when Babe Ruth came up again in, I believe, the 11th inning or the 10th inning, somewhere in there, he had a home run, won the game. And the reporters after the game asked Babe, said, "Weren't you afraid of striking out again?" He said, "Oh, no. The only thing I was thinking about was hitting a home run." So, you know, the thought process is there that I'm not going to dwell on the past failures, on the past of my grief and lack of recovery, but I'm going to look toward the future. And one of the books that I cited in my resources, both when I did the Why study and this time, is a book called A Journey of Desire by John Eldredge. And I highly recommend that book because it was written as a postscript to him losing his best friend in a mountain accident. They were climbing a mountain and his best friend was killed and fell and was killed. And that prompted that book, The Journey of Desire. But in that book, he tells a story about the sea lion. I don't know whether you've ever read the story of the sea lion, but I thought it's kind of long, but I think it really tells us a whole lot about what we are created for and what we can do. And this is called The Sea Lion, and it says, "Once upon a time there lived a sea lion who had lost the sea. He lived in a country known as the Barren Lands. High on a plateau far from any coast, it was a place so dry and dusty that it could only be called a desert. A kind of coarse grass grew in patches here and there, and a few trees were scattered across the horizon. But mostly it was dust, and sometimes wind, which together makes one thirsty. Of course, it must seem strange to you that such a beautiful creature could wind up in a desert at all. He was, mind you, a sea lion, but things like this do happen. How the sea lion came to the barren lands, no one can remember. There was a time many years back when the sea lion knew he was lost, In those days he would stop every traveler he met to see if he might help him find his way back to the sea. But no one seemed to know the way. On he searched, but never finding. After years without success, the sea lion took refuge beneath a solitary tree beside a very small water hole. The tree provided refuge from the burning rays of the sun, which was very fierce in that place. And the water hole, though small and muddy, was wet in its own way. Had you journeyed in those days through the barren lands, you might have seen the sea lion for yourself. Quite often in the evening, he would go and sit upon his favorite rock, a very large boulder which lifted him off the burning sand and allowed him to view the entire country. There he would remain for hours into the night, silhouetted against the sky. And on the best nights, when the wind shifted to the east, a faint smell of salt air would come to him on the breeze. Then he would close his eyes and imagine himself once more at the sea. The sea lion loved his rock, and he even loved waiting night after night for the sea breezes that might come. Especially he loved the dreams those memories would stir. But as you well know, even the best of dreams cannot go on. And in the morning when the sea lion woke up, he was still in the barren lands. Sometimes he would close his eyes and try to fall back to sleep. It never seemed to work, for the sun was always very bright. Eventually it became too much for him to bear, and he would only visit the rock on occasion. The sea lion was not entirely alone in those parts, for there it was he met the tortoise. Now the tortoise was an ancient creature, so weathered by his life in the barren lands that at first the sea lion mistook him for a rock. He told the tortoise of his plight, hoping that this wise one might be able to help him. Perhaps, the tortoise mused, this is the sea. His eyes appeared to be shut against the bright sun, but he was watching the sea lion closely. The sea lion swept his flippers once against his side, gliding to the end of the water hole and back. I didn't know, he said. It isn't very deep. The tortoise said, you must learn to be happy here, for it is unlikely you will ever find this sea of yours. Deep in his old shriveled heart, the tortoise envied the sea lion and his sea. But I belong to the sea. We are made for each other. Perhaps, but you have gone so long now, the sea has probably forgotten you. The stories of the ancient tortoise were enchanting and soon cast their spell upon the sea lion. As weeks passed into months, his memory of the sea faded. The desert whispered the tortoise is all that it is, or was, or ever will be. The sun grew fierce and burned his skin. The sea lion would hide in the shade of the tree, listening to the tales woven by the tortoise. When the dry wind cracked his flippers and filled his eyes with dust, the sea lion would retreat into the water hole. And so the sea lion remained. It was in May that the winds began to blow. The sea lion had grown used to wind, and at first he did not pay much heed at all. Eventually the winds would always pass, but not this time. Day and night it came, howling across the barren lands. There was nothing to stop its fury, nothing to slow it down. For 40 days and 40 nights the winds blew, and then just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The sea lion looked around and he could hardly believe his eyes. Every single leaf had been stripped from his tree. 3 weeks after the wind ceased to blow, the sea lion had a dream. Now, as I told you before, there were other nights in which he had dreamed of the sea, but those were long ago and nearly forgotten. Even still, the ocean that filled his dreams this night was so beautiful and clear, so vast and deep, it was as if he was seeing it for the first time. The sunlight glittered on its surface, and as he dived, the waters all around him shone like an emerald. If he swam quite deep, it turned to jade, cool and dark and mysterious. But he was never frightened, not at all. For I must tell you that in all of the dreams of the sea, he had never before found himself in the company of other sea lions. This night there were many all around him. Oh, how he hated to wake from that wonderful dream. The tears were running down his face, and it was the first wet thing he had felt in 3 weeks. But he didn't even pause to wipe them away. He didn't pause, in fact, for anything at all. he set his face to the east, and he began to walk as best a sea lion can. "Where are you going?" asked the tortoise. He said, "I'm going to find the sea." You know, that's a simple little story, but I think it tells us a few things about desire. It tells us that God created us with a purpose, and no matter how deep our pain or our grief is, God's desire is that we return and be useful in the kingdom. And I think along this line, you have to catalog those memories so that your memories lead to desire, so that desire becomes your goal, so that you find what God has created you for in the purpose and the place of ministry. As Linda said, there's no one like you in physical makeup, and there's no one like you that has the experiences that you have. So, you know, in ministering to others, everybody has a story, everybody has a history, and everybody has a choice as to what they will do and whether or not they will allow recovery to take place, or will they choose to stay in the barren lands like the sea lion finally made up his mind, hey, I'm not made for this desert, I'm made for the sea, and I'm going to go find the sea. So with that said, hopefully we will all make the choice to decide that I want to find that new normal and recover from my grief and allow God to use me again. So with that said, I think Linda has some copies to hand out.